Marcus was the kind of person everyone could count on. Reliable, hardworking, always available. If someone needed help, he said yes. If something had to be done, he took it on. His calendar was always full. His to-do lists never ended. And on the surface, it looked like he had it all together. But no one saw what it was costing him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd had a slow morning, or a real day off. Even when he wasn't working, his mind was. Thinking, solving, preparing. He convinced himself that rest was a luxury, that slowing down was selfish, that his value came from how much he could give, produce, achieve. He said things like, "It's just a busy season. I'll take a break once this is done. It's not that bad. I can handle it." But that season never ended. And the truth was, he couldn't handle it. He was burning out. Not loudly, not dramatically, silently. And the silence was the scariest part, because no one saw him falling apart. Not even him. The signs were there. He just kept ignoring them. He was always tired, even after a full night's sleep. His patience wore thin. Small requests felt overwhelming. He forgot things, missed calls, zoned out mid-conversation, but he pushed through. Because that's what strong people do, right? They don't complain, they manage. He started waking up with dread, not because of anything specific, but because every day felt like survival. Another round of giving more than he had. His inbox overflowed, deadlines piled up, social invites went unanswered, and still, he kept saying yes. He feared what would happen if he said no. Would people stop relying on him? Would he seem weak, lazy, irresponsible? So he kept going, kept doing, kept showing up, until one afternoon he stood in the middle of his kitchen, staring at the same task list he'd rewritten 3 times, and couldn't move. Not out of laziness, not out of rebellion, out of emptiness. He wasn't resisting his work, he just had nothing left to give. And that was the moment it hit him. He had been slowly disappearing, while staying busy the entire time. Marcus didn't tell anyone. He went to work the next day, smiled when expected, answered emails, took notes, nodded in meetings. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. But inside, everything was unraveling. His mind felt foggy, his body heavy, and no matter how much he did, it never felt like enough. Not because the work had changed, but because he had. He wasn't working from energy anymore. He was working from obligation, from fear, from habit. At lunch, he sat in his car. No music, no podcast, just silence. For the first time, he asked himself a question he had been avoiding for years. If I stop doing everything, who am I? The question felt dangerous, because he didn't know the answer. So much of his identity was tied to being productive, helpful, reliable, but he had never paused to ask what he needed, or wanted, or felt. He realized he had built a life where everyone's needs came first, except his own, and now he was paying the price for that silence. Not in one dramatic collapse, but in a slow erosion of self. If this story feels familiar, hit subscribe and turn on the bell, because taking care of everyone else means nothing if you forget to care for yourself. That evening, Marcus canceled a meeting. It was a small decision, one calendar event, one message that read, "I need to reschedule. Thanks for understanding." But to him, it felt massive, like dropping a weight he didn't realize he was carrying. He sat in his living room, staring at nothing. No distractions, no screen, just stillness. And in that stillness, something unexpected happened. He didn't feel guilt. He felt grief. Grief for the years he spent saying yes to everything except himself. Grief for the creativity he buried under responsibilities. Grief for the version of him that kept waiting for permission to rest. Tears came. Not loud, not dramatic. Quiet. Like a pressure valve finally releasing. He realized then that burnout wasn't just about doing too much. It was about not feeling safe enough to stop. And now, for the first time, he was beginning to question the story he had lived by. That worth comes from how much you can carry. That rest must be earned. That asking for help means failing. That night, he wrote down one sentence in his journal. Maybe doing less isn't weakness. Maybe it's wisdom. The next day, Marcus did something that would have terrified him just weeks before. He said no. A colleague asked if he could take on just one more thing. And for the first time in years, he didn't smile and nod. He paused, breathed, and said, "I can't take that on right now." There was no excuse, no over-explaining, just a boundary. And to his surprise, the world didn't end. No one lashed out. No one shamed him. They simply said, "Okay." He walked away from that moment with a strange feeling. Power. Not control over others, but the power of choosing himself. He realized how many times he had abandoned his own energy to protect other people's comfort. How often he'd said yes out of fear, not love. So he began to reevaluate everything. His routines, his calendar, even his relationships. Which conversations gave him life, and which drained him? Which commitments were rooted in alignment, and which in guilt? It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And little by little, he began to rebuild his life. Not around productivity, but around presence. Marcus began waking up differently, not to an alarm, not with urgency, but with a softness he hadn't felt in years. He didn't reach for his phone first. He didn't scan his inbox while brushing his teeth. He let his mornings breathe. He started journaling again, not about goals, not about hustle, just feelings, questions, truths. One morning he wrote, "I used to be proud of how much I could carry. Now I'm learning to be proud of what I've let go of." That sentence stayed with him. He no longer needed to be everywhere, no longer felt guilty for rest. He started protecting his energy the way he once protected his reputation. He realized that burnout hadn't come from caring too much. It came from caring about everything except himself. Now, he asked different questions. Does this serve me? Am I doing this from love or fear? Is this helping me stay connected to who I am? Each day, his life became a little quieter, but also a little more honest. And in that honesty, he didn't just find recovery, he found respect for himself. One evening, Marcus stood in front of his mirror, not to fix his appearance, but just to look. He didn't see exhaustion in his eyes anymore. He saw awareness, not someone who had everything figured out, but someone who had finally started asking the right questions. He no longer chased being the go-to person. Now, he just wanted to be present. He learned that burnout doesn't announce itself. It whispers, it waits, it hides behind the masks of ambition, helpfulness, and strength, until one day you look around and realize you're achieving everything except peace. But now, peace was his priority. That didn't mean he stopped being responsible. It meant he stopped abandoning himself. He noticed his boundaries became clearer. His time felt sacred. He said no with more ease and yes with more heart. His relationships deepened, not because he was doing more, but because he was finally showing up as himself. And that was the difference. He wasn't just avoiding burnout. He was becoming someone who didn't need to prove his worth through exhaustion anymore. Marcus didn't need a big moment to feel whole again. There was no dramatic breakthrough, no life-changing retreat, just quiet days, honest choices, and space. Space to feel, space to rest, space to remember who he was before he became everything for everyone else. He didn't share this shift online. He didn't write about it. He lived it. And slowly, his life began to reflect that new rhythm. He took walks without his phone. He worked with pauses, not pressure. He left messages unanswered if it meant protecting his peace. And most importantly, he learned how to return to himself again and again, without apology. One day, he opened an old journal and found a page filled with crossed-out goals, deadlines, checklists. He turned the page and wrote just one sentence: "I am not what I produce. I am who I protect, starting with me." Then he closed the book, sat back, and smiled. Because the real story wasn't that he burned out. The real story was that he listened. And from that silence, he built something unshakable: balance.